This is Frances Feldman on on
July 25th.
July 25th, 2002, interviewing Stephanie Klopfleisch in my home. Stephanie, how does it happen that you became a social worker?
I entered social work quite as an accident. After I graduated from college, I needed to get a job, and I really wasn't career focused, and the first job that became available was as an eligibility social worker in the welfare department, BPA. But when I started, right, and I started in Metro South, and had a good training experience. And after I worked there a few months, I became very, very interested in the work. I became interested in the clients and what they were like. And I had this one client, I can still remember her to this day. Her name was Blank Acosta. And she was a young woman. She had 2 children, and she was quite mentally ill, and she'd been in and out of Camarillo. And she was an AFDC intake case for me. And she began to describe her life and how much she wanted to be able to provide a home for her children, and how much she wanted to be able to get a job, and how much she wanted to feel better. And I could see that I was the only person that she had a connection with to try to help her. And it just struck me that this was very important work that welfare social workers were asked to do. And we didn't really have a lot of training in how to help people and how to help them mobilize themselves.
When was this?
This was in 1963. And so very quickly I was really committed to being a social worker. And it just happened fortuitously, the county had started a scholarship program where they would send selected people to get their master's degree. So I applied for that program, and I was selected. And I went to UCLA in 1964 for my MSW. And that was an excellent learning experience for me. I think it really helped me get my skills and my perspective on the field together. And I had good field work experiences. I was at Florence Crittenden Maternity Home
In Los Angeles.
in Los Angeles with Catherine O'Neill, who was a marvelous social worker.
Catherine Nielsen.
And Catherine Nielsen, that's right, Catherine Nielsen. And she was terrific. And then my second year, I had a placement in the Kaiser Permanente Child Psychiatry Department. And I enjoyed it, but it helped me see that my greatest interest really was in social work planning and program development. And so I went back to the welfare department in 1966.
Did you have a commitment to be back there for a certain
Yes, I had a
length of
2-year
time?
commitment to work. And I wasn't certain how long I was going to stay there. But I went back, and I went into the children's, it was then called the Child Welfare Bureau. And I became influenced by this wonderful woman, Mary O'Neill was her name.
What?
Mary O'Neill.
Mary O'Neill.
Yes, and she was an MSW, and she was over the child welfare group. And she was very inspirational, and she was a tiger of a lady, she used to say. Just remember, these children are dependent on other people to help their lives go well, and you have to be responsible, and you have to be accountable. She really got us all fired up, and we worked very, very hard, often without a lot of resources, and not as much training as you would like. It was somewhat scary. We had very large caseloads. I think I had 96 children in placement. So between the foster children and the needs of the foster parents, it was quite a busy time, but I enjoyed it. And then after that, I became a supervisor, and rather rapidly I became a manager in the welfare department. And was the assistant. It was called Deputy District Director. I was the Deputy District Director in Metro North in 1966. And there I ran into my second great influence. Because I've often wondered, Frances, why did I stay in public social work so long? And it's because I had these role models that really did inspire me about how you could make a difference despite the complexity and the inertia of working in bureaucracy. Well, as the Deputy District Director in Metro North, I ran into this woman called Florence Alpern. And she was an MSW, and she was the training supervisor, but she was absolutely fearless. She didn't care about bureaucracy and what things could happen that would go wrong. If something was good and appropriate for her clients, she'd work round the clock to make it happen. And I really learned from her that if you wanted to make a difference, you had to be bold. You had to keep your eye on the fact that helping clients was important, and remember that sometimes you might get some knocks from the administration if you try to do things differently, because DPSS was like, the Bureau of Public Assistance then was like a giant army, very authoritarian, very structured, and you did everything by the rule books. But Florence inspired me about how to be creative and how to do things differently. She was one of the first persons that called together case conferences on welfare cases. And she'd pull together people from private agencies and from health and from school. And we'd sit and try to work together good case plans for families. So she was very inspiring to me. She helped me a lot as I became a manager then. After I had that operation where I was responsible for a field office, then I went to central administration, and I was the first assistant program deputy of this new program called food stamps that was coming in. And the food stamp program didn't exist yet, but it was on the way, and I had this dubious job with a few other people. We had to write the instructions for how this program would go. Oh, what an onerous task that was, because we didn't really understand what it was going to be. We didn't understand that this was going to be a huge program that many people who were not traditional welfare recipients were going to be.
Did that involve the Department of Agriculture at your level too?
At that time, no. I was not at the level where I would be dealing with the Department of Agriculture, but I was dealing with state officials on the implementation of it. And there I had another inspirational source. One of the assistant directors in the department's name was Marvin Friedman. He was a wonderful man. He kind of took me under his wing. And he taught me all about the politics of working in public welfare programs. But I mean, he really did mentor me. You know, he told me the importance of learning how to talk to politicians, of how to talk to people in the State Department and the Federal Department, and try to be persuasive about the needs of the local area. And he made me very committed to the role of advocating for Los Angeles County, that really was my job, to try to describe to others what our county was like, to try to describe to others what the clients needed, to try to get out there and get the resources. And Marv was wonderful, and he'd take me to Sacramento with him and introduce me to legislators, and basically taught me how to lobby and be an advocate, which is really important in public social work. So that was a great learning experience, and despite having to work on food stamps, which I will never say that was my cup of tea, writing all those regulations, we got through it, and it was interesting. I had a very good career in DPS. It changed its name. It became the Department of Public Social Services. And that was in synchronization, I think, with the big change that was happening on the federal level, where the former program to aid old people and to aid disabled people, it's called OAS and ATD, on a national level, those programs, the Old Age Security Act and the Aid to the Totally Disabled Act, they were being folded into new programs in the Social Security Administration, and a much more appropriate thing than with the Welfare Department. So during that transition, the Bureau of Public Assistance changed its name to the Department of Public Social Services. And I became a division chief, and one of my first responsibilities, along with other division chiefs in the department, was to help the transfer of all these cases from the local administration to the Social Security Administration. And another less desirable part of my job was to assist with the downscaling then all the workers who had been responsible for the old age cases and the aid to the totally disabled cases. They either had to find other jobs or go to other jobs in the county. And so that was a difficult and tumultuous time. And that lasted for several years, but it was a very excellent thing that ultimately happened, and I think it's been a good change in this country to have these two programs run under a national program that way, very uniformly. So, after I worked in that,
Can we stop
Sure.
a minute, because I want to ask you about that. When the change was being made of transferring these two programs to the federal agency from state county, how was that handled? Was the county involved in that? Did the state make the decisions? Was there just a cutoff date by such a date these people would be getting their checks from the federal government?
well, there was a long planning curve involved because it covered all the states in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
So the National Association of Counties and individual large welfare departments such as ours worked closely with Health and Human Services. Only then it was called Health, Education, and Welfare. That department worked closely with Health, Education, and Welfare and the Social Security Administration in planning kind of an orderly move. And there was a long lead time, so nobody was caught in arrears, and a lot of planning went forward on it. And overall, it went very smoothly in terms then of clients were notified, they were told what it meant, they were given a lot of information about the conversion to the other system. If there was a precipitous part on it, it was for the workers who had worked in that area, because for them, the changeover was definitely traumatic. Despite all of our efforts, we were not able to find enough jobs for all the social workers who'd done it, because suddenly these huge caseloads were gone, and the federal government did not take the social workers.
It didn't take over the social workers.
No. So a number of social workers were demoted to other positions in the county. Now, during this same time, the county...
When was this in 60?
This was... No. This was in...
in the 70s.
Yes. This was 1972 when it was ultimately completed. But it was going on beforehand.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The Department of Public Social Services and all the other welfare departments in California made a split between services and eligibility and how cases were handled for people on welfare. So essentially clerical people came in to take responsibility for doing intake on cases, determining eligibility, and setting up budgets for people who needed financial assistance. The social workers, who were more highly educated, more highly paid, had a smaller responsibility than for just setting up special plan of protection or adults who might need the new It was called Homemaker Chore Program then, but it's now called In-Home Support. Or for adults who needed referrals for special community services. But what happened then, there was a dramatic staffing change in the welfare department, where instead of having primarily a college-educated workforce, you had primarily a high school clerically educated workforce with some additional social workers. Now the children's services continued to be handled by BA and MSW social workers. And that continued for a number of years. I became the assistant director in DPSS in 1973 for all the social services and for children's services. And that was, it was a huge job. It was a huge job. I liked it very much. I did that for 6 years. We had about, at that time, we had about 4,000 total staff. And we functioned for adult and children's services. The biggest problems then were an extreme lack of funding in the children's services and really very extreme. It was funded under the old Title 4A program. And I spent so much time marching off to Washington trying to get favorable changes in regulations and in programs to get more money, as did many other people across the country. Everybody was very concerned about it. And just about that time when this funding was very tight for children's services and the concept of child abuse became very well articulated, and the child abuse reporting laws began to pop up all over the country, and a code of ethics and practice related to child abuse began to come into the discussion. And this had an enormous impact on the children's services caseload. Because before, I think the kind of cases that came into children's services were either very extreme, so that anybody who saw the child would say, "Oh my God," and they'd call an official because the situation of harm or neglect was so obvious. But after the child abuse reporting laws became put on the books and the mandatory reporters were identified, that is school teachers and health professionals and counselors and ministers, and these people began to get training in it, suddenly what happened was children began to be identified as in need of those services. And so there was this mushrooming of caseload, which began in the 70s and continued steadily for 20 years. That was a good thing. I think those children needed the assistance and needed to be identified. But, like a lot of other things, the services were not in place for them.
And adoptions was an entirely separate department.
Yes, adoptions was an entirely separate department. I left DPSS in 1979, and I became the Chief Deputy Director of the Community and Senior Services Department. And
will you repeat the name of that?
Community and Senior Services. And that was a department that had been recently created, and its task was to handle the federal service funds that would be contracted out. And in addition, operate community centers throughout the county and be the area agency on aging. And so when I made that move to the department, it was a relatively small department. And it was a very exciting change for me. It was so exciting because it was like night and day compared to the welfare department. When I think of the welfare department and my years in it, it was like being a member of an armed force. It was very structured, very regimented. Everything was reduced to paper rules and so on. And though you had caring individuals and all trying to do their very best, it was extremely bureaucratic and structured. I went to this new department, Community Services, which was the absolute opposite. And at first, it was a terrible culture shock to me. But I never saw such a great opportunity to accomplish things in my whole life in government, and I still haven't run anything across anything as unusual. The department had, just by happenstance, had a lot of workers who had started in private agencies in the war on poverty. And they came to the county when they saw similar programs coming to this new Department of Community and Senior Services. Now, these people had a real flair for relating to the community, and they saw instinctively the need to start where clients were at, where community was at, where people were at. So they had mediation by the larger community in the development of programs.
Let me just ask you, there was no involvement here of giving money for assistance?
Not at this point. That came later. The department grew a lot while I was there and had a lot of additional responsibilities. But at that point, no.
So you were free to really establish relationships around troubles that were not financial troubles.
Right, exactly. And the other thing was the department, and I and another woman, Lynn Bear, had a lot to do with this. We empowered the staff to the maximum possible. Instead of trying to restrict their job to the thing that you could most control in writing, we truly tried to give everybody a job where every skill and every talent and every interest they had could be exploited. And the net result was we were considered one of the most productive departments the county had ever had. Mm-hmm. People loved working there. We have, to the day I left as director when I retired, we had almost no turnover. People would join the department, and they just absolutely loved it. And they stayed, and they worked hard. I was there in the department from 79 until the day I retired in 2002 when I was the director. We grew a lot. And that was good. The board gave us the responsibility for adult protective services, and we had the area agency on aging, and then we got responsibility for the programs for refugees and immigrants, and then we got the responsibility for domestic violence services and all the shelters that went with it. So we grew an enormous amount, and although our basic mode of service delivery in community and senior services was through contract, we had almost 800 people when I left, and we operated a network of 30 offices that we had services in it, 14 senior centers and service centers, and
all around Los Angeles County.
Los Angeles County, yeah. And we had some very, very innovative programs during that time, and that were built though as a community. When the new immigration laws came and the amnesty program started, we worked with 200 community agencies, and we mobilized a giant network, and in less than a year we assisted 500,000 people become citizens, which was a great deal because the INS in this county is just a hopelessly confused organization. But the advocacy was incredible, and the support we got from the private agencies was what made it possible, because we had private agencies who were familiar with the languages and the customs of immigrants, and they were able to mold skillfully, and we in the department knew how to advocate and push and make things happen in terms of procedures. And so we put together a very powerful program and worked with so many people in that year, and that was really wonderful. When the employment and training programs really mushroomed in the 90s, our department became responsible for them in the county. There had always, for years, since the War on Poverty, there had always been some kind of small federal employment training program. There was SEP, and there was CETA, and then there was JEPA, and then there was the welfare reform. And those programs became extremely large, and through time, they became one of the biggest activities I was involved with. They featured a large participation by private sector individuals, and unlike all the other programs, our job training programs, private citizens shared responsibility, oversight responsibilities with the Board of Supervisors. It was very interesting, and I think it made the program stronger because we were administering and planning and developing programs and getting clients, and we were doing allowances for things like child care and clothing and first and last month's rent and that kind of thing. But the Board of Supervisors and the private citizens board on it, if both didn't agree, it couldn't go through. Each could veto the other, but neither could force the other to do anything. And it was a fascinating way to go. And I think
persuasive.
And I think the Department of Labor was very wise. Their reason for doing it, I believe, was that they wanted the expertise of the private business person to come in and help in the development of these job programs. And it was a marvelous idea. Well, when I was working in the welfare department, we were primarily a maintenance organization, although we did do some experimentation with child care. But in community and senior services, we were constantly innovating and working on new programs, and that was really rewarding. If I had to say, one of the most exciting things I worked on was in the development of the countywide welfare reform system that went into place in 1997, and that was the result of the congressional legislation that changed welfare from an eligibility and stipend system to one where people had to participate in employment and training programs to get aid, and in which the federal government said you would have just 5 years to maintain funding from the federal government, then you're on your own. So this was a huge change, and I worked on a department head committee of welfare, mental health, and community, our department, and CAO, developing an integrated plan that would use the services of all 5 departments to the benefit of the client. And that was really exciting. There were not turf issues. We were trying to make seamless, client-friendly programs so that when somebody came in to get a job, it would be easy for them to get child care. It would be easy for them to get a homemaker provider if that's what they needed. That it would be easy for them to get the job training programs, which we did, my department did. If they had domestic violence issues, to access domestic violence programs. And it was really wonderful working together like that. And I think the program got off to a very good start here. The proof of the pudding is going to be in the next year or two as clients begin to exceed their 5 years of eligibility. Mm-hmm. And although there's a fail-safe, there's a net underneath this program that a lot of people don't understand. If you don't have a job after 5 years, if you participate in community service, your children can still be aided. So it's not quite as dire as it sounds. Mm-hmm. But that was an exciting change, and I think a good one, and I think the clients liked it very much. Instead of feeling like they were a perennial dole case, I saw hundreds and hundreds of clients. I used to go to their orientation under this new workforce plan that was going forward. And they were excited about it. They were absolutely excited. And we took those old welfare buildings and stuff, and instead we got very modern office buildings. We dressed. Everybody had to dress professionally, no wearing jeans or anything like that. And the clients were expected to dress the same way, and we established clothing shops for them and stuff where they could get business clothes. And I listened to all these different people, and they all said the same thing. I want to take care of my own family. I want to get a job. I'm afraid. I don't know if I have the skills, but I want to try it. I don't want to live on welfare. This is not a good life. And it didn't matter which language they were saying it in. It was all the same message. So, for all its flaws, I personally felt that the Welfare Reform Act in 1996 was on the right track. And I certainly hope that it's implemented well enough for the long haul that it'll make the difference that it was intended to. But that was pretty exciting.
Did you find that a good proportion of the people were able to get and hold jobs?
A good proportion were able to get jobs, but it was during a time in the economy where the economy was very strong. Now that I'm retired, I am not as familiar with what's happening now that the economy has been down for some time. The bigger issue seemed to be we were able to get everybody their first job. You know, the motto that we used to use was a job, a better job, a career. And that was the order. You get a job, and then you would have on-the-job training so you could get a better job, and then you'd have schooling in addition so that eventually you could have a career. And that was the theory. And it seemed to be working, but a key thing was how many jobs are out there in the economy. And of course right now with the dot-com bust and the technology bubble, I suspect that's created some difficulties.
Did you encounter any problem with child care for working parents?
Yes. The child care was not as readily available and not as quickly available. Sometimes somebody'd have a job, and yet the scarcity of quality child care was a problem, and so their child care wouldn't be ready soon enough for them. And although there are a fair number of licensed daycare homes and communities, there aren't as many percentage-wise as there used to be because a lot of women have entered the workforce, double what it was 30 years ago. So child care has been a definite problem.
There was an article in this morning's Times that spoke about the large number of welfare recipients who can't stay with a job or can't find one because of the shortage.
I'd have to say that's one of the two big problems with the welfare reform, and the second one is transportation, especially in a county like Los Angeles. You know, it wouldn't be such a problem in New York City because they have a good public transportation system, but ours is limited. So sometimes you'd have a woman who lived in Compton who had succeeded in securing a job downtown Los Angeles, but her child was in a school that was 2 miles from her house. So somehow, getting up in the morning without a car and without access to public transportation, she had to get her child safely off to school, some distance from her home, and then get to her job, and so on. And that was
then
very
reverse
difficult.
the procedure at the end of the day.
Exactly. And those I think were two big practical problems now. They were trying to develop a program whereby clients could buy cars at no cost, and ultimately, when they reach some income level, repay that. But I think that's still an important obstacle. And then there's another one, Francis. In the long term, the support of families before they reach the welfare level is critical. Kids have to be helped to stay in school. Everybody has such a disadvantage. If they don't finish high school, it's almost economic doom. in our day and age. So there needs to be a lot of effort to help keep kids in school, and where possible to help kids either go into vocational training after school or into college programs. Unfortunately, our LA Unified School District seem to be having a lot of problems in succeeding in that area. So that's part of it. But I feel hopeful about the possibilities for some success in future years, with the fact that the employment training programs are still going strong.
So that if the economy is moderately good and child care facilities are available and transportation arrangements can be worked out, there's every chance that these people can be working.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that it's the responsibility of government to try to make sure that all those variables are okay. Even in a down economy, there has to be some kind of safety net that's there. Now, interestingly, Los Angeles, one of the programs we had in my department when I was the director, and I became the director of community and senior services ultimately, and that was my favorite job in the world. I loved the people, I loved the mandate, our responsibilities, and I enjoyed working in the community so much. It was a very rewarding experience. But one of the programs we had was called Refugees. Refugees. And a simple name, but the mission of that program was to receive refugees who had been brought to this country through the State Department and make sure that they received acculturation services, help getting food and housing in this new community, and ultimately job training so that they could be supported. And Los Angeles was a recipient over the years of floods of all kinds of refugees from different countries. You know, first there were Cuban refugees, and then there were Vietnamese refugees, and then Cambodian, and then Hmong refugees, and then there were refugees from Jewish persons that were being persecuted in the Soviet Union. Then there were Haitian, Afghanistan refugees. The numbers are enormous.
But these were all programs that the federal government sponsored.
No. The federal government had one program called Refugees. The State Department would determine who was a refugee, and suddenly you'd get a notice in the county that we're going to be getting in the next 6 months 5,000 refugees from Vietnam, or we're going to be getting 600 from Haiti, or whatever the numbers were. And the State Department determined where people would go based on the size of existing populations and so on. But those programs we would gear up for, and we'd have to get the language-sensitive service, the culturally sensitive staff, and so on. But those were very successful programs. We had the highest rate of employment and people leaving welfare on the refugee programs of all of our programs.
Were they subsidized by the federal agency?
No.
Yes, county funds?
Excuse me. It was federal funds administered by the county. And refugees had 5 years to receive that unqualified support. And then after that, the same rules applied to them as any other person that came to apply for welfare. But that was a very, very fun program. And once a year, the refugees themselves would put together what they called Refugee Luncheon. And it was kind of like a cultural potpourri, and they would invite all the administrators that they liked to come and have lunch with them, and they'd do dancing and native singing and music, and it was their own celebration, one of being in this country, and their feeling that things were going well for themselves. It was a lovely thing. While I was working all this time, this job always felt natural to me because I came from a background where my parents were religious, and somehow it kind of got drummed into me that part of what you did was try to make things better for other people. So it was a natural kind of job for me. But there are a lot of things that happened during the time I was working that were very negative, and I thought were sad for our population. And one of the hardest things that I think to this day was when the changes in the mental health laws came and we just arbitrarily closed off hospital mental health services and sent a flood of mentally ill people to communities where there were no services. And that's what caused all the homeless people to, during the 80s when we suddenly began to see all these homeless people everywhere. There were people who'd formerly received services from mental hospitals. And I still don't think there's been a good resolution of that problem. We have acutely mentally ill people on the streets who I believe are a danger to themselves through their just persistent neglect and inability to take care of themselves. And we never generated enough revenue really to provide an adequate mental health service for the homeless, and I think it's very tragic. You just have to go down to San Julian and Wall Street downtown and see the thousands of people down there, and it's kind of like a scene out of Bedlam, very mentally ill, hallucinating right on the street, hundreds and hundreds of people wandering around, and no solution or planning on the end. The Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority was started and has done a good job of getting homeless resources available and used as much as possible in the law. So that was
now that's a city and county joint
Correct.
agreements agency.
Correct. So they have made some inroads on that. The other thing that I thought was too bad in it's what I made it. I put that down. That's something that I wanted to mention. Proposition 13.
I didn't hear that.
Proposition 13.
Oh.
When Howard Jarvis sold the state of California on the need for tax reform, he took the underpinnings of local social services funding away, and other funding too. And we've never recovered for that. Absolutely never recovered from it. I don't think we ever will. State administration of the programs I worked with was generally unhelpful. It tended to be over-controlling, bureaucratic, never focused on service issues. Focused primarily on accounting, control, and audit issues, and it was a very aggravating thing to deal with. Now, there were certainly some exceptions. There were always some administrators who were good and helpful people, but most of the time that was a level of program intervention that I didn't care for. The other difficult thing during my experience here, all social services programs and all people need health services. And there has been one crisis after another in health. And because partly the complexity of such a large system, health is huge, has 27,000 employees, 7 hospitals, dozens and dozens and dozens of clinics. It's hard to administer to begin with, but there's a chronic funding crunch, and then the fact that we have this large illegal immigrant population and undocumented immigrant population, they must serve people for whom there's no federal and state reimbursement. And it's been an impossible situation. And it was always hard in our cases. The one loop we'd be trying to help a family in a comprehensive way, we'd often have difficult times trying to get health care for them. And that's not better, and in fact, it may get worse with the promise of the federal Medi-Cal waiver that's coming up. So a lot of important work at the county level still to be done. On the bright side, though, the county has done a wonderful job with senior programming, and they're taking very seriously, and my department took very seriously the fact that the huge number of seniors and the fact that the 85 plus was the biggest cohort of population growth in the country. And we'd set ourselves a 15-year course to be geared up to provide the service level we think we will need by the year 2010. There has to be a great expansion in nursing homes and in respite care facilities for Alzheimer's patients and in more services.
Did you serve the county as a whole? Where did the cities
the city of Los Angeles served the
city
seniors.
senior care?
Yes, there were two area agencies on aging in the county. One was the city of Los Angeles, and one was the county of Los Angeles. And that was interesting. That was a political decision many years ago. When the area agencies came into being, it was intended they would be whole counties. But the city council really wanted to have their own senior programs, so there was kind of a negotiated settlement. And it's worked actually very well. I think having the two entities, they've played off each other, they've learned from each other's successes and failures. And right now there is an extreme push and a very long advocacy effort to get more funding because we want the seniors to be able to be served that are coming upon us.
So the two agencies work together?
Oh, work very cooperatively, and put on joint. I was just saying that the senior departments are working very hard to be ready for the vast expansion in senior programs, and they put together a major plan which has been approved by the County Board of Supervisors and the City Council that will feature, I think, just a really quality program. And interestingly, one of our models has been Japan. Japan experienced the growth in seniors before our country did, and we have been getting information from them about how they did get mobilized and which things were most important now that their crunch of seniors is upon them. And that's been very helpful. My department was very good at planning things. When we took over Adult Protective Services from the Welfare Department, we've expanded it enormously and lowered caseloads, and we have a less than 24-hour response time on all of our cases, and we've established a number of model programs under it, and as a result, we were asked by Israel they paid us to come and assist them in developing an adult protective service program. They had also previously, we went for 5 years running to assist in the establishment of domestic violence protocols and domestic violence shelters, and to do the first survey on what the domestic violence needs were in Israel. And that was very exciting work. We sent our head of the domestic violence council and 4 workers. We did that for 5 years running, and that went so well. Then 2 years ago we started with Adult Protective Services, and unfortunately the tumult in the Near East has made it such that this year it was determined that it was just too dangerous to send any workers any place. But I think that was one a tribute to our own programs and the fact that we have gotten them operating so well and we understand so well how they work that we're kind of considered an expert on that. And also, we do have a willingness to help other areas developing programming, and that's been very interesting for us. And I think, Francis, just about covers it. I can't imagine as a career having done anything that was more gratifying I feel like, for myself personally, it was a privilege to be able to work in a creative field. The social workers I worked with were wonderful and exciting and kind and caring people. And the programs that we developed, they were good at their heart. Mm-hmm. There was never anything to be ashamed of or anything. Not everything worked as well as you might have liked it. But I think it's a marvelous way to spend your life.
Now, besides working for the agency, you also have been doing volunteer things.
Yes, yeah.
Why don't you tell us about those too?
Well, I've volunteered for many years at Pomona College. Been on a number of their boards, and as vice.
Is that where you went to school?
Yes.
For your undergraduate work?
I went to my undergraduate work at Pomona College, and I've been on a number of boards there. Let's see, I was on, while there was a UCLA School of Social Work, I was on the governing board there for about 5 years, I believe. And then I'm very active in Seroptimus of Los Angeles, which is a service organization. We sponsor 2 domestic violence shelters, which is a nice kind of hand-on work. And I play in the Brentwood Symphony. I play in 2-string quartets.
Oh, you do?
Yes,
what
I do.
Instrument do you play?
I play the viola.
Uh-huh.
And I also play the piano, and I'm the accompanist for the Apollo Men's Glee Club. My only paid musical job at this time. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, when my children were growing up, I was very active in their schools. So it's been a busy full life.
How many children?
I have 3 children.
And where are they now?
My oldest daughter is married and has 3 children, and she's a hospital administrator at the Memorial Care System in Orange County. She's at Saddleback Memorial Hospital. My daughter, Jennifer, is in graduate school in New York City, Pratt Institute. She's an artist. My son regretfully died when he was 19, but he was a very bright, handsome musical boy. So,
and what is the one in New York studying?
She's studying design. She'll be getting her MFA. And I think she has had an active career after she got out of college. She worked for AOL and a movie production company. But I think what she plans to do actually is get a college teaching job. An MFA is the degree for that in art. And then do her painting on the side. I think that's where she's headed. But
is she in New York City?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there evidently are lots of opportunities there.
Yes,
now.
there are a lot of opportunities there. And she always had good opportunities out here, too. But I think she's taking she's 29 now. I think, what am I going to do with the rest of this time? Great.
Well, there's another volunteer activity, and that's the California Social Welfare.
Yes, indeed.
Archives.
I'm a volunteer on the California Social Welfare Archives Board, which is very interesting and important work, preserving those documents.
Because you've done a very fine job for us there.
Thank you. I'm very interested in that. So, I think that about sums it up.
Well, are there any thoughts that you have that you'd like to leave with whoever reads this?
Yes, there is. For whoever reads this, a lot of people in government get discouraged about the prospect of effecting positive change. And I want to say to them, never give up heart. You have more power than you realize. Your energy and your ability to empower other people to join you in the things you think are right are far greater than you can imagine. And I know that from my own career, my own experiences.
And I would echo it from mine.
Yes. Yeah, too many people are easily saying, oh, this is a bad place, and blah, blah, blah.
Yes, and I think a great many really don't understand how effective a public organization role can be.
Yes, right.
And
It is true.
so this has been very helpful, and
Good.
I think we'll do better on this recording.